I think it's because they live and they evolved to live in water, which is a very different medium than air. They don't speak and use vocal cords in the air the way we do, and the way other animals that breathe air do. But they make lots of sounds. For instance, they have swim bladders. They can vibrate, and teeth and bones. They make a whole range of sounds depending on which species. So, but I think the fact that they don't breathe air makes them more alien to us. And maybe another thing is that their facial expressions, which they may have, but we don't detect them very well. Their faces to us look just static. They're still. They're not expressing things with their eyes, although they do communicate with body movements and postures and sounds and even smells, chemical communication. So there's a lot going on, but we're not tuned into it because we're living in air and they're living in the water. And I think that's their biggest disadvantage. On the other hand, they've been around on Earth much longer than mammals have and other terrestrial vertebrates, so they've had longer to evolve. So in that way, they're very sophisticated in many ways, and I'm sure we'll touch on that in this interview. Yeah, clever scientists have come up with ways to probe the inner feelings of fishes. So one study that amazed me when I read about it was fishes who were stressed, and you can measure stress in the blood of a fish by measuring the cortisol, the stress hormone levels, which is the same thing we have, corticosterone. And these fishes were upset and stressed. And then if they were given an opportunity to receive caresses, to receive gentle touch, as happens when they go to cleaning stations on reefs where cleaner fishes will actually caress them with their pectoral fins, maybe to make them feel better if they're unhappy with the interaction, which sometimes happens. That caused them to become much less stressed, much quicker. They measured the blood before and after. And fishes who didn't have an opportunity to receive caresses, to receive a massage, if you like, their stress levels, their cortisol levels remained high. And the ones that could get the gentle touch, which is it's widely known to be therapeutic for many animals, including ourselves, of course. We go to a massage therapist to relax and de-stress. And it had the same effect on the fishes. Their cortisol levels stayed high if they couldn't get caressed, and it came down if they could. So that's sort of one way of getting a window into the inner life of a fish and how they're feeling, how that animal, who when we look at them we can't really tell how they're actually feeling inside. There's a fear chemical that a lot of fishes produce called Schreckstoff. It's a German word meaning scary stuff. Was the term was coined by the Nobel Prize winning ethologist Carl von Frisch, who studied fishes in addition to studying honeybees. And he noticed that when a fish is scared or upset or sees a predator or is feeling negative, they release this fear chemical, Schreckstoff, and other fishes can detect that. So it's a very useful clue. Whether they release that chemical with the intention of communicating with other fishes, I don't know. But other fishes can use that, including a different species. So that's another kind of angle on the inner life of these animals, how they can have emotions. It's just that unless we think hard about trying to detect those emotions and figure out what's going on, we wouldn't know that they had those feelings, but they actually do. Fishes respond to Prozac, like an antidepressant, in the way that we do, and Valium, which is an anti-anxiety medication. If you give them those chemicals, those drugs, they respond similarly to us. They relax. They seem to feel better about their situation. So there are studies of giving drugs to fishes that show that they respond in a way that we would expect them to respond if they were more like us, which they are more like us than we think. Yeah, we often think of emotions as advanced phenomena, and yet they've been around for a long time. One could argue that emotions evolved before cognition did. Uh, One way I like to put that, when I say cognition, I mean the ability to think. One way I put that is think of some primitive fish who is being chased by a predator. Uh, if the fish had to think about, oh, there's a predator, I better get away, that would take longer than if they just have a quick fear reaction and flee immediately, fight or flight, get as far away as quickly as you can. So that's an example of how emotions may have evolved first because they're more important. They're important for survival. Whereas having to think about something can slow things down. Obviously, being able to think about things and solve problems and use intelligence is also very useful, but not necessarily always the most useful response to things. So there's both scientific and anecdotal support for, well, I mentioned the Shrek stuff, the fear, which is an emotion. Um, Boredom, fishes who are in captivity, they may become listless. Grief, it's mostly anecdotal, but I think if scientists come up with a clever way to study grief, incidentally, the part of the problem with studying these things is that you have to subject animals to unpleasant situations, and we may have some ethical concerns about that. We should have ethical concerns about that. But people who have, for instance, goldfishes for long periods, they can live for 40 years. A pet goldfish who they often become attached to their companions in the tank in the aquarium. And if that companion were to die, which often happens, of course, the other fish may become what looks like depressed, may stop eating for several days. Sometimes the other fish dies as well. So it's challenging. We don't know exactly how they're feeling inside, but we can guess that there's some negative feelings, some feelings of grief based on the behavior that they show. I can actually tell you that I'm feeling depressed and I'm not feeling depressed at all, but I could lie to you, right? I could deceive you. And similarly, we can do that with each other. And because we can't tell what the other person's feeling inside, we can only guess. I've been writing a book. It's actually a finished manuscript now. It'll be published in another year or so that looks at cooperation and joy in the wild. We often, my impression is that we often think of existence in the wild as harsh and cruel and competitive and predatory and parasite filled, and it has all of those things. Those definitely are negative things can happen, but there's a lot of joy too. The pleasure of touch, as I mentioned, pleasure of discovery, freedom, socialization, food, shelter, comfort. I mean, the list goes on. It's a huge list of the positive aspects about life. Just look at a dog who gets told, "You want to go for a walk? You want to go outside for a walk?" The dog goes ballistic, right? Not all dogs, but dogs get very excited about that. Why? Because they're active, they're engaged, they get to go and explore the world. That's intrinsically pleasurable. If animals didn't have that kind of reward system, they wouldn't be motivated to go and get food. They wouldn't do very well. So this pleasures provide the motivation, the rewards drive animals to do things, including ourselves, to do things that help us to thrive and succeed in the world and do well. So it's so important to think of that broader context, and it's no less the case for a cat or a beetle or a snake than it is for a human, or of course a fish. Why not, right? Pain, like like emotions, like cognition, the ability to think, the ability to feel bad things, to feel pain is very adaptive, very useful thing. It's sometimes we wish we didn't have it. I fell off my bike 3 days ago and I'm still sore and I wish I didn't have the pain, but the pain teaches me don't do that again. It was stupid. It was a bad idea what you did. So pain is a warning and it causes us to favor to not further damage the injured part of the body and also to not do again, to not repeat the behavior that led to pain. So why wouldn't we expect pain in fishes? The main basis for pain is a survival mechanism. Now, plants don't move around, so pain isn't really beneficial to them. I'm not saying we shouldn't respect plants. I think we should. But a plant cannot move away from a source of pain, whereas an animal can, a fish. And there's growing evidence that not just backboned animals, vertebrates, but also invertebrates such as insects and crabs and crustaceans and octopuses that not only have a sense of pain, but they also have emotions as well. So that's sort of a revolution going on. But if we think about fishes, absolutely, they're full members of the vertebrate group. They have the same sensory systems that we have. Do they feel pain always the same way in the same circumstances we would? Probably not. And so there is still that challenge of the private nature of pain. that we cannot literally feel their pain any more than you can feel each other's pain or I can feel your pain. We only have our own to guide us. But animals flee, fishes will flee. They have the right physiology for pain. They have the same kind of nociceptors we have that are sensitive to chemical pain, to heat pain, and to mechanical pain, such as direct damage of the tissue. And studies also show, clever studies show that they will exhibit what's called place preference, which is to say, if you cause a fish to be in pain by injecting the fish with a painful substance, like an acid, for instance, as was done in one study, and then you give the fish the opportunity to stay where they normally stay, which is where it's safe, it's dark, and there's lots of cover, or go into a place where they normally avoid because doesn't feel very safe, but it has painkiller dripped into the water, lidocaine in this case, a painkiller. The fishes who are given the acid will swim over there and actually spend time in a tank that they would normally avoid. So it shows not only do they have the wherewithal to relieve the pain, but they also are willing to pay a sacrifice, to pay a cost to get pain relief. And I think that's a very compelling method to show pain in another animal. It's been done on crayfish as well, and probably a lot of animals who live and breathe in the air. But fishes certainly will behave that way. They're willing to pay a cost to get pain relief. Once their pain relief is complete, they'll swim back and spend time in the safe place again. And the ones who are the control group who are injected with not with acid, but with a saline solution that has no caustic effect. So just an initial pain from the needle, they won't go and swim in that place where there's lidocaine. They don't need to because they're not suffering pain. They can't get pain relief. So it shows a lot about the experience of pain and the awareness of how to stop pain if you have the opportunity. Well, it's good in a way that you do get criticism and you get people reacting to your message because that shows that they're paying attention and they're engaging in what you have to say. And I don't know about you, I'm old enough to have met a number of people in my life who used to fish or used to eat fish or used to do this or that, the other that was bad for the animal. And now they become vegan or they become much more different attitude about what they thought before. And that comes from engaging and thinking about these things. So I hope you know that you're doing good, even if you get criticized. Yeah, I was thinking about that today. So one example would be self-recognition. Most of the members of the public probably wouldn't even think about that. What does that mean, self-recognition? Among scientists, it's considered to be a pretty high-level cognitive, mental thing to have self-awareness, to have a sense of oneself. It relates to being an autonomous individual and having a personality, which fishes have. So, mirror self-recognition is the kind of the gold standard of testing to see if an animal has a sense of self. You put a mark on the animal, say a dot on the chin where they cannot see it on themselves. But if they look in a mirror, if you give them a mirror and if they see their reflection and then they see the dot, if the animal, makes a threat display or swims around the back of the mirror, that may suggest that they don't have a sense of self. But really, to be fair, they need time to adjust because fishes don't see mirrors normally in their environment. There aren't mirrors down there at the bottom of the ocean, well, not usually, or in reefs and that sort of thing. So, in fairness, it helps to give them a little bit of time to get used to the mirror. But soon they start swimming in such a way they can see the mark on their throat, and they may swim down to the bottom to rub against the sand, or if they're in a tank against the glass to try to remove the mark and then come back and look at themselves again. These are behaviors that are consistent with a sense of self. The fish is looking in the mirror and saying to herself that that's me. That's not another fish. That's me. That's myself. And that is very important in terms of the implications of individuality, autonomy, a sense of self, a sense of uniqueness. It's the basis for being able to relate to other individuals and also probably understand that they have a sense of self, that they're another individual. I see you as an individual and I understand that you see me as an individual. So that may not be that important or that salient for the average layperson who doesn't study animal behavior, but for scientists who do study animal behavior, that's a very important and telling ability. Studies have shown fishes have culture, so these are phenomena that are not passed along genetically, they're passed on behaviorally through observation, through teaching perhaps, and fishes don't just inherit their behaviors from their parents. They do that. That happens, of course. It happens with us too. But like you and I, we have cultures in our different cultures, different types of behavior in our countries. You know, we're going to talk about the carp for Christmas, kind of cultural phenomenon in your country. We don't have that here, but we have turkeys for Thanksgiving and that sort of thing. So fishes don't have either of those traditions, as far as I know. But they have been studied and found, different populations of the same species have different behaviors and different ways of doing things. And that's culture. And so culture is something that I think most people never would have thought that fishes have. We tend to still have a pretty dim view of fishes. And that's why we have conversations like this, is to try to improve that and make people realize that they're much more sophisticated than we thought. There are examples of virtue among fishes. Rabbit fishes, for instance, they will forage together as a pair, and while one of them is feeding on the algae in the reef with their head down, so they're quite vulnerable, the other one will be swimming with the head up. There's a photo that's probably in the book. It's in the English edition, and I think it's in the other editions, of a rabbitfish who plays lookout. So the rabbitfish who's playing the lookout is making it safer for the other one to feed. And to play the lookout, you have to forego food yourself for the temporary. Of course, they switch places after a couple of minutes, so everybody gets fed, but they get fed safer. So that's an example of a virtuous behavior, and there are many other examples in the oceans of virtuous behavior. Restraint is another one that I think is worth mentioning. The cleaner stations I mentioned earlier, sharks, for instance, a shark or a moray eel will allow a little shrimp or a cleaner fish to pluck their teeth, to swim into their mouths and clean out algae and other unwanted things from the animal's mouth. And the moray eel or the shark never eats the cleaner fish. It's not a good idea to maintain good business relationships by eating your business partner. So it's an example of how there's trust and mutual understanding that an interaction is safe and mutually beneficial. Because of course the cleaner gets some food and the client gets a spa treatment and a cleaning service. So I think the cleaner stations, it's called the cleaner client mutualism, which is one of the best studied mutualisms in nature by us. There's a lot of close scrutiny of those interesting relationships. It's a nice example of the complexity and the nuance and the awareness built into the social behavior of fishes. Of course, as an animal lover and a vegan, I'm not happy to learn of that tradition, and of course, not to point fingers at the Czech Republic and the Czech people, because every country has cultural practices that are disturbing when it comes to the treatment of animals. So, personally, I don't want to celebrate an occasion by including harming or killing an animal. It's very disturbing to me, the thought of that, either me doing it or somebody else doing it. So I think with things like that, the challenge is that you're up against practices and behaviors that have been going on for long periods, and they develop sentimental value and they're passed on from generation to generation. I'm not really known for being a strategist, but I would think that perhaps one of the best ways to tackle those traditions, and that tradition in particular, is to come up with an alternative that can bring the same joy, if that's the right word for it, without causing harm to another. Why hurt another to get joy for yourself? There's many ways of getting joy and feeling the warmth of the occasion without harming another. So, I don't know what you're doing to tackle that, but certainly my feeling is that offering alternative practices and, of course, alternative foods that can replace the carp is one approach. So I wish you luck with that. I think it's you know, we have the same things here this time of year. Millions and millions, tens of millions of turkeys are being slaughtered for Thanksgiving and then Christmas. And it's a built-in tradition, and it's very hard to stop those traditions. But one of the ways to do it is, of course, to have alternatives. And another thing is, of course, to educate people about the ethical problems of practicing killing fishes or killing turkeys or what have you. So that's kind of a rambling answer and not exactly a solution. But you know, I think having people like you who set a good example is crucial to the change. That's one of the things I feel is very empowering about being a vegan, is that I can be an ambassador for that choice for others, even if I don't say anything, just by the example that I set. Well, Lucas and Misha, lovely to meet you. Thanks for what you're doing, and I
Thank
hope
you.
we'll cross paths again.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Bye
Take care.
bye.
Bye.